What's up, guys? So today we are going to be talking about why most people really do not have a good idea of how much fat they need to lose when it comes to their fat loss goals. So we're going to be given a few examples today. This came to mind because I had two people close to me ask about how much fat they'd have to lose or how they would lose that fat. And it's very, very common. It's a very common question. And most people are shocked. We've all seen the many examples of people who think, I just have that last 10 pounds. And these are people who probably have 30 plus pounds to go. Anybody who's gotten contest lean or even close to contest lean understands that there's usually more and more that you can lose. But most people don't want to be contest lean. So even for the individuals who just want a flatter stomach or abs, what does that necessarily look like? So I remember back in college, there was a big guy, Chuck. And he was probably 230, maybe 6 feet tall. And I remember telling him, you probably have to be about 175 to compete. And he was shocked. This is a guy who was a big guy all of his life. And for college, he was a pretty big, muscular guy, but he wasn't huge. He was probably also closer to 30% body fat. And I remember he was just so surprised when I said that. I'm like, look, man, I'm telling you, I know a lot of people compete and who have done it. You absolutely would have to be in the 170s. And when you actually look at like his lifts and everything compared to other naturals and whatnot, that kind of made sense. But two recent examples. One was a friend of mine who is about 185 and he's got a little bit of a belly, but he's a muscular individual. He looks good. He lifts, big arms, skinnier legs. And he said, man, so like how much do you think I'd have to lose or what I have to do to get abs? And I said, honestly, man, to get abs, you'd probably have to be about 160. And he said, are you serious? You think I have to lose 25 pounds? And this is a very normal looking individual. Like zero people would look at this guy and say that he is fat at all. They just normal shape. But I've seen his stomach when he was showing me, and he's probably about 17% body fat. And this is why anybody who's followed the channel knows I'm very big on objective markers and the math and doing the numbers to see where things are going to end up and to be realistic, right? If somebody says, well, I want to be more muscular and that's their goal, well, what does that actually mean? Or you want to do this. I've mentioned examples of lifts before where somebody says, oh, well, I want to have this lift. And it's like, okay, what does that mean on a week-to-week basis? So for this individual, I said, look, you're not fat at all, but you're probably sitting around 17% body fat. And if you're 185 and you're 17% body fat, if you do the math and you calculate how much lean body mass you have, right, and then you divide that by 0.9 to say, okay, how would you get to 10% body fat, right? If you're assuming 10% body fat is when you're going to have like solid abs, like really like relaxed abs, well, then that shows you the weight you'd have to be. Now, if you do that, you're going to be at about 170. So you think, okay, well, that's 15 pounds, not 20 to 25 pounds. But nobody loses pure fat. Now, if this was somebody who was a beginner where they could actually gain some lean body mass along the way, that's a different story. But most people are not in that situation. So this is like an intermediate to advanced lifter, probably more of an intermediate lifter realistically. And so in that situation, maybe you do a very good cut and you maintain all of your lean body mass. I think realistically to get down to 10%, there's no reason you really need to be losing muscle for most people, especially at an intermediate stage. But let's say he doesn't do everything perfectly and it's just 1 to 2 pounds of muscle loss. Then you're going to have water weight, right? So a significant amount is going to be water. And so let's say it's 3 to 4 pounds of water weight. And then there's going to be some loss of food bulk, right? So if you're just eating less, generally there's going to be a little bit less food bulk. So all in all, maybe it's not 25 pounds, maybe it's 20 to 22 pounds. But most people looking at this individual would think, you just got a little bit left to lose, not that much. They're thinking they're going to lose 5 to 7 pounds and they're going to have abs, and it's really not even close. And the difference between having to get down 5 to 7 pounds versus 20 to 22 pounds is months and months of effort. And this person was asking me in the middle of May, well, sorry to say, you're not going to have those abs for summer if that's what you're hoping for. Realistically, you might have them for Christmas. I mean, you could certainly diet much faster than that, right? You probably could do faster than 1 pound per week, but realistically, it's not just going to be a few weeks. And this is where the numbers are really important. I'll give one more example before we get into practical takeaways. And this individual is very close to me. This is a woman in her 60s. And she is probably a top percentile, top 5 percentile as far as physiques for somebody in their 60s. For a woman in her 60s, most women would be very, very glad to look like this in their 60s. But she mentioned that she's got a little bit of a pouch now, right? As far as like on her belly, she's got a little bit of pouch there. And so she's wondering, how can she get rid of that? And she's at a point where she understands, okay, it's not that crunches are going to be doing that. I think she's probably well aware that now, like, you can't just spot reduce that fat. But then she'll still mention things that maybe target that area. And we talk about how, no, that's not really going to be doing it. You just have to lose overall fat. And her point is, well, I don't really have that much fat to lose, which is true. She does not have much fat to lose, and most of her body is very lean. But the reality is, that's why that fat is there, is because it is the last fat to go. It is that kind of stubborn, resistant fat, and the only way it's going to go away outside of liposuction is to continue to lose more fat. To which this person acutely said, well, I don't think that would be good for me to lose more weight. And I said, that's exactly right. You should not lose more weight. And that's the problem. As a 60-something-year-old woman who, I don't want to say was frail, but just any older woman who's not working out all the time is generally going to be more frail and has to be concerned about things like osteopenia, osteoporosis, fractures with a fall or anything like that. If this person is 5'8", 5'7", 120 pounds, they really should not be losing more weight, and that would be a significant detriment to their overall health. Even if you could actually lose the fat necessary while gaining muscle, in this instance, you'd probably have to gain 5 to 7 pounds of muscle and then lose fat. And again, you'd still be losing fat everywhere else, and this would be the final thing that came out. Well, at 65 years old, as a woman who has exercised but not been like super serious, it's very, very, very unlikely, if not impossible, that you're going to gain 5 to 7 pounds of muscle. Somebody who's naturally skinny, been skinny their whole life, at 65 years old as a woman, it's just not going to happen. And so even if you could do that, the body fat would get so low that it would be a net negative. It would probably make you feel worse. You would look worse because you look so gaunt, but that's not going to happen anyway. And so she's like, well, okay, well then what do I do? And the unfortunate answer is, in this case, what you do is you accept it. You accept it as somebody who is at that point in life. You have to accept it. And it's not what anybody wants to hear. And again, you can go get liposuction and that will work right away. And there you go. You don't have to accept it. So, I'm not anti-plastic surgery or anything like that. But at that age, that's what you have to do. Now, again, I'm speaking about somebody who is already eating a very healthy diet, generally active, not as active as they could be, not lifting as much as they could be. There are absolutely things to do, and we're going to get into that. But the point is, we have to be realistic about what is possible, again, depending on one's stage of life, and what is realistic and what one should be focusing on. Even if something is realistic, is it going to be a negative to their life? And so if we look at the bigger picture and say, okay, Dave, well, you're telling me this, you're telling me that, it's going to take longer than I expected, or it's not possible. Well, what do I actually do with that information? Well, the reality is the vast, vast majority of the people watching this channel are not 65 or even close to that age. Most are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe some in their 50s as well. And so most people, and again, most people who watch this channel are male. So there's going to be an increased potential for muscle gain. So what I would say is that if you do not have a timeline specifically that you have to get lean for a certain show or an event or something like that, first focus on gaining the muscle. Because the reality is the vast majority of people who just, I really want to get abs and I want to get it quick, probably don't have enough muscle for it to look good when you diet down. I can think back to when I got started with all of this and I really wanted abs. All I cared about was abs. And I just got skinnier and skinnier, and I really wasn't even that lean. I was maybe 12 to 13% body fat. I just did not have enough muscle mass that even if I got completely shredded, it just wouldn't have looked good. It just would have looked honestly very unappealing to almost anybody outside of somebody who's completely just focused on that one part of the body. So I would say put on the muscle first. Then, once you have the muscle mass, focus on slow and continued progress towards that goal. So in the first example of that individual, I guess it was technically the second individual who I mentioned wanted abs, in that example, that person needs to look out months ahead of time and say, okay, if I actually want relaxed abs for the beach, one, why do you actually want that, right? Is it actually going to be a net positive for you? If you're going to have your whole summer thinking about the abs and being hungry, if it's really, really difficult for you to do that, is that worth it compared to just enjoying life? The reality is, I've mentioned a number of times, I'm kind of living leaner these days, probably 10 to 12% body fat the whole last year. And it's not that difficult for me to do now. But at one point, that would have been very difficult for me to do and probably a net negative. And I really regret in high school pushing myself so hard to try to be lean, and I would bulk up and cut down and bulk up and cut down. It's not like I was one of those perma-cutting people, But I honestly probably would have just said I would have enjoyed my life better at that point if I just stayed in that 14 to 16% body fat and kept getting stronger and progressing, especially going through puberty and everything there. You would have had so much potential for growth. I wouldn't have really bothered with trying to get so lean. I understand like that's a time of life when it's great to have abs and you want to look as good as possible, but that is not in the cards for a lot of people, especially for people who are younger listening. It's just not, and it can be at your detriment if you're trying to be so lean. At that point, again, get into lifting and sports and just progress. But if you're older, 20s and 30s, and you just want to have the abs, take the time to do it. Make sure you have the muscle mass, and then gradually diet down and plan for it. And just realize that when you get to that point, it might look good and hopefully you can enjoy it, but it's not going to make or break anything. I'm pretty soon going to be doing probably the hardest diet I've ever done in terms of getting the leanest I've ever been. Hopefully it's not actually the hardest for me. But when I do that, I have no expectation that when I get to that point, I'm just going to be so happy about it and it's going to be amazing. It's just a goal that I have that I want to see how it looks. But the reality is I'll probably just look skinnier, and I don't even know if it's going to be a net positive for how I look or my general life. Practical takeaways for somebody in that last situation where I mentioned, the 65-year-old woman who's got a little bit of a pouch. I'm definitely not trying to give the impression that you can improve. I'm not trying to say to anybody that they can't improve. If you are an 80-year-old individual and you haven't been exercising, you can improve dramatically from where you're at. But in a situation like I mentioned, this is somebody who is already quite lean, been active most of their life. The net result of trying to lose that last bit of very stubborn fat as a 65-year-old woman, it's just absolutely going to be a negative. And even if it was possible, the amount that you would have to focus on at that point would be 4 times the effort that you're putting in currently. So in that situation, and I'm sure I'll send this video to that person, I would just say, accept that very small amount, right? Most people would be so happy to have that physique in their 60s. And then just focus on health. And, again, you can still want to look really good. There's ways to do it, but realize that you're probably not going to have the perfect 25 to 30-year-old body in that situation. So I think it's much more important to focus on big picture here. And remember that at the end of the day, this is supposed to be a net positive to one's life. So that is kind of the message here. I know a lot of people are obviously focused on a specific goal, and fat loss is the most common goal that people in the fitness industry have. It can absolutely be done. Most people can get shredded in a realistic way, but you have to be methodical about it. And if you're looking at your goals, look at the actual numbers, make sure you're focusing on what's realistic, and actually do the math to play out how much you have to lose over time, and just account for the fact that there is going to be some lean mass loss. So from food bulk to water to actual muscle mass, some of that is going to be lost along the way, and it's never going to be perfect. So account for that in your plan. So that is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully there was some practical takeaways there, but I had 2 recent examples that I just wanted to kind of put this video out for them, but also for the channel. And so I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Make sure you subscribe for more videos.